The envelope was sitting on the kitchen counter when I got home from the funeral. I almost didn't open it. I was 63 years old, I'd just buried my wife of 31 years, and I had nothing left in me. My tie was still on. I hadn't eaten since the night before. The house smelled like the flowers people had brought over, lilies mostly, and I couldn't stand the smell of lilies anymore. The envelope had my name on it, typed, not handwritten, return address, Kellerman and Associates, attorneys at law, Austin, Texas. I set it on the counter and went to bed. I read it the next morning with cold coffee. It said that my wife, Vera— No, I need to stop. I keep starting stories in the middle. Let me go back to where this actually begins, because if I don't tell it right, none of it makes sense. My wife's name was Nadine. Nadine Ruth Calloway, née Pratt. We met in 1991 at a church social in Abilene. She was 26 and I was 32, and she laughed at something my friend said, and I thought, that's the laugh I want to hear for the rest of my life. We were married 11 months later. We had 3 kids. We built a life, and for 31 years, I thought I knew her. I did not know her. The letter from Kellerman and Associates informed me that Nadine had retained their firm to manage certain property interests, and that upon her death, those interests transferred to me as her sole beneficiary. They requested I call to schedule an appointment at my earliest convenience. I called that morning. The receptionist gave me a slot 2 days out. I spent those 2 days going through the motions, accepting casseroles from neighbors, signing papers the funeral home sent over, listening to my daughter tell me I needed to eat more. I didn't sleep much. When I did sleep, I dreamed about Nadine the way she looked the last few years, tired and quieter than she used to be, like she was carrying something heavy that she couldn't put down. The attorney's name was Philip Kern. He was maybe 50, wore reading glasses on a chain, had the kind of careful voice that lawyers develop after years of delivering news that changes people's lives. He shook my hand and pointed me to a chair and set a folder on the desk between us. "Mr. Calloway," he said, "I want to start by saying your wife was a very deliberate woman. She thought carefully about everything she put in place here." I told him I appreciated that, and to please just tell me what we were dealing with. He opened the folder. Nadine had purchased a property in the hill country outside of Fredericksburg, Texas, 47 acres. A main house, 2 outbuildings, a stock pond. She'd bought it 4 years ago, paid cash, and had been paying the property taxes and maintenance through a separate account I'd never known about. The property was now mine, free and clear. I sat with that for a moment. "She never mentioned it," I said. Philip Kern nodded slowly, the way people do when they already know the answer to something. "There's more," he said. The property had mineral rights attached. 3 years ago, Nadine had been approached by an energy company that had been doing geological surveys in that part of the hill country. They believed there were significant natural gas deposits beneath the land. Nadine had hired an independent geologist to verify their findings. The geologist confirmed it. Nadine had then negotiated a lease agreement with the company, royalties, not a sale, and had been receiving quarterly payments ever since. "How much?" I asked. He told me. I made him write it down because I didn't trust my ears. The number had 6 figures in it, every quarter. For the past 3 years, my wife had been receiving that money, depositing it into an account I did not know existed, and saying nothing to me. Nothing to me, nothing to our kids, nothing to anyone, as far as I could tell. I drove home in a fog. I remember stopping at a red light on Congress Avenue and just sitting there after it turned green until somebody honked. I don't remember the rest of the drive. I want to be honest about what I felt, because people assume you must feel one thing or another in a situation like this. The truth is, I felt everything at once. I felt stunned. I felt something that wasn't quite anger but was close to it. I felt a terrible, hollow grief that was different from the grief I'd already been carrying, because this one had a question mark at the center of it. Who was this woman? Who had I been married to? And underneath all of that, I felt something that shamed me a little. I felt curious. I needed to go see it. This place she'd kept from me for 4 years. This secret she'd tended and watered and never once let me near. I needed to see it with my own eyes. I called my son Brody that evening. He's my oldest, 30 years old, works in commercial real estate in Dallas. I told him about the meeting with the attorney. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Dad," he said finally. "How much did you say?" I told him again. Another silence. "When are you going out there?" I said I was thinking about going that weekend. "I'll come with you." I told him I wanted to go alone first. He didn't like that, but he accepted it. I did not tell my daughter Thompson, and I did not tell my youngest son, Court. I don't know exactly why I made that choice. I think I knew, somewhere in that part of me that had been married to Nadine for 31 years, that I needed to see it alone before it became anything else. Before it became a conversation or a conflict or a question of fairness. Before it stopped being hers. I drove out on a Saturday morning in October. The hill country in October is something else, the live oaks just starting to turn, the air thin and cool, the sky that particular shade of blue you only get in Texas in the fall. I had the address in my phone and the gate code Philip Kern had given me written on a piece of paper in my shirt pocket. The gate was aluminum, painted black, set between 2 limestone pillars. The name on the gate said P-Rat. Rod was Nadine's maiden name. I sat in the truck for a moment with the engine running. Then I punched in the code and drove through. The road was caliche, white and chalky, winding back through cedar and scrub oak for about a quarter mile before the house came into view. And when it did, I understood, for the first time, the full weight of what Nadine had done. It wasn't a cabin. It wasn't a weekend retreat. It was a proper house, limestone exterior, wide covered porch, metal roof, the kind of house that someone builds when they intend to stay. There were flower beds along the front, dormant now but clearly tended. A weather vane on the outbuilding shaped like a road runner. A rope swing hanging from a live oak in the yard that looked like it had been there for decades. Though the property was only 4 years old, I got out of the truck and stood in the yard and did not move for a long time. The key Philip had given me was on a plain brass ring with a small tag that said, "For Ront." I unlocked the door and went inside. The air was stale. No one had been here since before Nadine got too sick to travel, I figured. But the house was clean and organized, everything in its place, because that was Nadine. The kitchen had a cast iron skillet hanging on the wall and a collection of small pottery pieces on the windowsill above the sink. The living room had a braided rug and 2 leather chairs facing a stone fireplace. On the mantel, there were photographs. That's when I had to sit down. There were photographs of our kids when they were young. Brody at maybe 8 years old, gap-toothed, holding a fish. Tamsin at her high school graduation. Court in his Little League uniform. And there were photographs I had never seen before. Nadine by herself, standing in the yard of this house, smiling in a way I hadn't seen her smile in years. Nadine at the stock pond at sunset. Nadine sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee, squinting into the morning light. She had been happy here. Whatever this place was, whatever it meant, she had been happy here. I sat in one of the leather chairs by the fireplace and I cried. I hadn't cried at the funeral. I hadn't cried when the hospice nurse called me in the middle of the night 3 weeks ago. I'd been holding it in some container inside my chest. And now the container broke and I cried in this house I'd never known existed, in a chair my wife had chosen, looking at photographs of my children and a woman who apparently had more rooms in her than I'd ever found. I stayed 2 nights. I went through the house carefully, not searching exactly, but looking. There was a small desk in the second bedroom that Nadine had used as a study. The drawers had files in them, property documents, the mineral rights lease, insurance papers, everything organized, everything labeled, because that was Nadine. In the back of the bottom drawer, there was a composition notebook. Her handwriting on the inside cover, for Walter, if you're reading this. I am not going to tell you everything that was in that notebook. Some of it is mine to keep, but I'll tell you the parts that matter. Nadine wrote that she had inherited a small amount of money from her aunt when she was 52, money I'd never known about because her aunt had been estranged from the family for years, and no one expected anything. Instead of depositing it in our joint account, which she wrote she'd almost done, she'd done something she couldn't fully explain at the time. She'd held on to it. She'd let it sit in a separate account for 2 years while she figured out what she wanted to do with it. What she wanted, she wrote, was a place that was just hers. Not because she didn't love me, not because she was unhappy, but because she had spent 30 years being someone's wife and someone's mother and someone's daughter-in-law. And she had realized at 52 that she didn't know what was left of herself when you took all those roles away. She had bought the land with the inherited money. She'd built the house over 2 years, piece by piece, making decisions that were entirely her own. She'd named it Pratt Ridge. She'd planted the flower beds herself. She'd chosen the furniture and hung the photographs and found the rope swing at a salvage yard and installed it herself with help from a neighbor down the road. And then, 3 years ago, the energy company had called. She wrote that she hadn't known what to do with the money. It was more than she'd ever imagined. She'd kept it because she didn't know how to explain it. Not the money itself, but everything the money meant. The land, the house, the years of coming out here by herself for weekends, telling me she was visiting her college friend down in San Antonio. All of it was a lie, and by the time the lie had grown that large, she didn't know how to cut it open without bleeding out. She wrote that she was sorry. She wrote it more than once. She wrote that she wanted me to have it. All of it. The house, the land, the royalties, everything. She'd written it into her will and structured it through the attorney and made sure there was no question. Whatever she'd kept from me in life, she gave back in death. I read the notebook twice. Then I put it in my jacket pocket and drove home. I need to tell you about what happened next because this is the part of the story where I discovered that grief is complicated enough on its own, and then people you love go and make it more complicated. I told Brody first. We met for coffee in Austin, and I walked him through everything. The property, the mineral rights, the money. I showed him photographs I'd taken on my phone. He was quiet through most of it, asking careful questions. The way he does when he's working something out. Then he said, "What are you going to do with it?" I said I didn't know yet. I'd only just found out. I needed time. He nodded. Then he said, "Have you talked to Tamsin in court?" I said not yet. He said, "You should do that soon." There was something in his voice that I filed away and didn't think about again until 3 days later when Tamsin called me. My daughter is 27. She's always been the sharpest of the 3. The one who notices things. The one who asks the questions nobody else wants to ask. She and Nadine were close in a way that Brody and Court weren't. They talked every week. They traveled together once. They had a whole language between them that I was never fully part of. She called me on a Tuesday evening, and I could tell within 10 seconds that she'd already spoken to Brody. "Dad, I need to understand something." I told her to ask. Mom had this property for 4 years, and she never told any of us. I confirmed that was correct, and there's significant money involved. I said yes. And she left everything to you, just you. I said that was what the will stated, yes. There was a pause. Then, that doesn't seem right to me. I told her I wasn't sure what she meant. I mean, we're her children. We should have been included if she had all that money sitting in an account. Don't you think she had some obligation to, Tamsin? I said. Your mother just died. I know that, Dad. That's not what I'm. She's been gone 3 weeks. The line was quiet for a moment. I just think we should all sit down together, she said finally, as a family, and talk about what this means going forward. I told her I'd think about it. Court called the next morning. My youngest is 24, still figuring himself out, working a service job in Houston, always a little short at the end of the month. I love Corge in the particular way you love the child who worries you most. He called me, and he didn't say anything about fairness or family meetings. He just said, "Hey, Dad, Brody told me about the property." That's a lot to take in. I agreed it was. You okay? I told him I was trying to be. Then he said, quiet, almost apologetic, "Dad, I hate to even bring this up, but I'm kind of in a bind right now with my rent. And knowing that there's all this money that Mom had set aside, I don't know. Do you think there's any way?" I told him I'd talk to him about it when I'd had more time to process everything. He said, of course, no rush, sorry to ask. And I heard in his voice that he was ashamed of asking, and I loved him for being ashamed, and I hated the whole situation. The family meeting happened on a Sunday at my house. All 3 kids around the kitchen table. Brody had driven down from Dallas. Tamsin came from her apartment in Austin. Court took the bus from Houston because his car was in the shop. I made coffee. I set out the box of donuts Court had brought. And then I told them everything properly from the beginning. The letter, the attorney, the property, the notebook. I didn't read them the notebook, but I told them what it said. When I finished, Tamsin said she visited her college friend in San Antonio. I said yes. That was the cover story. She was coming out here. I said yes. Tamsin looked at the table. Something moved across her face that I couldn't fully read. Grief, maybe, or something more complicated than grief. She and Nadine had talked every week. She had not known. It was Brody who brought it back around to money. He did it carefully, the way he does everything. Framed it as a practical question, not a selfish one. He said, "Dad, I guess what we're all wondering is, what's the plan? For the property, the royalties, have you thought about it?" I told them I'd thought about it a great deal. They waited. I told them that the property was mine, as Nadine had intended. I told them I wasn't going to sell it. I told them that the royalties were mine, and that I intended to keep receiving them, and that I planned to use them first to take care of myself, and then, as time went on, to be generous with my family in the ways I chose to be generous. If Court needed help with rent 1 month, we'd talk about that. If Tamsin had something come up, we'd talk about it. But I wasn't going to divide Nadine's estate into thirds and distribute it like it was something she'd meant to share. Because it wasn't. She'd made her wishes clear, and I intended to honor them. Brody said he thought that was fair. Tamsin didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "Can I ask you something?" I told her to go ahead. "Are you angry at her?" It was the first time any of them had asked me that. I thought about it carefully before I answered. I thought about the rope swing in the yard, and the pottery on the windowsill and the leather chairs by the fireplace. I thought about the notebook, and the way she'd written for Walter on the inside cover. I thought about the photographs on the mantel. My kids, her life, all of it held in this place I'd never been allowed to see. "No," I said. "I'm not angry at her." "How?" Tamsin asked. And she wasn't challenging me. She genuinely wanted to know. "Because I read what she wrote," I said, "and I think I finally understood something I should have seen 30 years ago. She was always more than I gave her room to be." That's a hard thing to say about someone you loved and thought you knew. It doesn't make me a bad husband. I don't think Nadine thought I was a bad husband, but she needed something for herself. not instead of me, but alongside me, and she never figured out how to ask for it. That's not entirely her failure. That's the shape of a particular kind of marriage. The kind where two people love each other, genuinely, and still somehow never fully see each other. I go out to the property most weekends now. I've cleared some of the cedar in the back pasture. I fixed a fence post along the south boundary that had been leaning since before I got here. The energy company sent a land technician out last month to check on the monitoring equipment, and he and I had coffee on the porch and talked about the geology of the area for an hour. I don't know anything about geology. I found it fascinating. I've started taking photographs, not with any particular intention, just I notice things now that I might not have noticed before. The way the light hits the stock pond at 6 in the morning, the road runner that shows up near the outbuilding every few days and seems entirely unbothered by my presence, the flower beds, which I'm figuring out slowly. I bought a book on native Texas plants. Nadine had sticky notes in the copy she kept in the desk, marking the pages for things she'd already planted. I'm learning the garden from her notes. There are things I still don't fully understand. Why 4 years of silence when she could have found a way to tell me? Why she let the royalties accumulate without ever hinting that anything had changed? I don't have good answers to those questions, and I've made a kind of peace with not having them. The notebook gave me what she could give. The rest is the mystery that every person carries, the interior country that nobody else ever gets full access to, no matter how long you share a life with them. Brody came out with me one weekend last month. We sat on the porch and drank beer and watched the sun go down over the pasture and didn't say much. At one point he said, "She really built something here." And I said yes, she really did. Tamsin came out the following week by herself. She walked the property alone for most of the afternoon, which I understood and gave her room to do. At the end of the day, she stood in the kitchen looking at the pottery on the windowsill, and she started to cry. She said, "I talked to her every week and I never knew." I told her that wasn't her fault. Some things people keep even from the people closest to them. Not out of a lack of love, but out of a need that's hard to name. Court hasn't come yet. He says he's going to, when his schedule settles out. I told him there's no hurry. The place isn't going anywhere. I'm not sure what I expected to feel when all of this started. Betrayed, maybe, in some clean and simple way, or justified, or vindicated, or some other emotion that comes with an obvious name. What I actually feel is harder to describe. It's something like gratitude, though that's not quite right. Something like wonder, maybe. The experience of discovering, at 63, that a life you thought you understood had more in it than you knew. Nadine built herself a room, a real one, with limestone walls and a metal roof, and 47 acres around it. She built it piece by piece with money she'd held quietly and choices she'd made alone, and she kept it for herself for 4 years, and then she gave it to me. I think that was love. I think that was her particular, difficult, complicated way of saying, "Here is the most honest thing I ever made. Now it's yours." I water the flower beds on Saturday mornings. I am learning which ones come back on their own and which ones need help. I'm figuring it out. I'd been sitting with this story for a few months now, turning it over the way you turn a stone in your hand, looking at it from different angles. And I keep coming back to the same thing. I spent 31 years with a woman, and I never fully saw her. Not because she hid herself maliciously, not because I was a bad husband, or she was a bad wife, but because we never quite learned how to make space for the parts of each other that didn't fit neatly into the life we'd built together. That's the thing nobody tells you about long marriages. You get comfortable with the version of a person you know, and comfort, after a while, starts to look a lot like assumption. I assumed I knew Nadine. I assumed that what she showed me was all there was to show, and she, I think, assumed that what she needed was too strange, too private, too hard to explain, to bring into the open. So she built it quietly, alone, on 47 acres outside of Fredericksburg, and she never found her way to telling me. There are consequences to that kind of silence, not just for her, but for all of us. Brody standing on that porch with a beer in his hand, trying to make sense of a mother he thought he knew. Tamsin crying in the kitchen over pottery on a windowsill, grieving not just the loss of her mother, but the discovery that even weekly phone calls don't mean you know someone's whole interior. Court, still working up the courage to come out and see it for himself. The silence cost something, that's just true. And I think Nadine knew it. I think that's part of why she wrote what she wrote in that notebook. She wasn't making excuses. She was trying, in the only way she had left, to be honest about what she'd done and why she'd done it and what it had cost her too. What I've learned, and I say this as a man in his 60s who thought he was done learning hard things, is that honesty is not a single moment. It's not one big conversation. It's a daily practice, and if you let it lapse, the gap between you and the people you love grows quietly. The way a creek erodes a bank. You don't notice it until the ground shifts under you. I've also learned that intelligence, real intelligence, not the kind that scores well on tests, but the kind that actually helps you live, means being willing to look at something uncomfortable and not look away. When I read Nadine's notebook, I could have chosen anger. I had grounds for it. Instead, I chose to sit with it, to try to understand what she was telling me, to ask myself honestly what my part in the silence had been. That is harder than being angry. It is also more useful. And then there's the matter of what you do when the ground shifts. Brody and Tamsin and Court had choices to make too. Brody mostly made the right ones. Tamsin took longer, but she came around. The measure of who we are isn't what we feel in a hard moment. It's what we choose to do next. I water the flower beds on Saturday mornings. I'm learning which ones Nadine planted and what they need to come back strong. It turns out some of them are tougher than they look. So are most people. If you give them enough room,